Tonight, we begin with a declaration that Canadian officials had anticipated, prepared for, and now openly confronted. A confrontation that unfolded not over weeks of diplomatic back channels, but in a matter of hours. Hours that redefined the tone of North American trade relations. Hours that sent shockwaves through financial markets on both sides of the border. Hours that forced the White House to recalibrate its assumptions about Canadian resolve. What Mark Carney did today crossed a line that Washington had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, Canada's incoming Prime Minister did not hesitate. He responded with clarity, conviction, and calculated defiance. For several weeks now, there had been whispers, not from official State Department briefings, not from formal diplomatic cables, and just whispers that Donald Trump was preparing something confrontational. Trump has been unpredictable, yes, but he has been methodical in his unpredictability. His moves have followed a certain rhythm, a cadence, almost a signature pattern. But what set off alarm bells in Ottawa and Bay Street this morning was that the rhythm went silent. Experts who monitor cross-border trade dynamics know the indicators. The sudden appearance of protectionist language in presidential social media posts, the scheduling of unannounced meetings with trade advisors, the conspicuous absence of diplomatic outreach to Canadian counterparts, the sudden shift in tone from White House spokespersons, all of that went quiet. And whenever Trump goes quiet on trade issues, it means something is about to get loud. Early this morning, Canadian intelligence and economic monitoring units detected what they described as coordinated messaging from multiple Trump administration sources, including language patterns that had not been deployed in bilateral discussions in over 18 months. These are the kinds of rhetorical weapons that Trump only unleashes when he is signaling something very specific: imminent tariff announcements, trade agreement renegotiations, or economic coercion. Observers didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Trump was changing his approach to Canadian relations. And when a U.S. president shifts trade posture without explanation, even by subtle degrees, Ottawa pays attention. The Trump administration's latest statements suggested that sweeping tariffs on Canadian goods, including steel, aluminum, lumber, and energy products, were being considered as leverage to force concessions on border security, defense spending, and trade imbalances that Trump claims disadvantage American workers. The response issued by Mark Carney tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Source after source described Carney's statement as unprecedented in its directness, calculated in its tone, and perhaps most importantly, strategically timed to preempt Trump's leverage before tariffs could actually be imposed. But intimidation only works if the target hesitates. Carney did not. In fact, his response today was among the most forceful we've seen in Canada-U.S. relations in modern history. Here's what we know. Within 2 hours of Trump's tariff threats surfacing through back channels and media reports, Carney convened emergency meetings with provincial premiers, business leaders, and trade negotiators. These weren't the standard quarterly briefings. These were crisis mode consultations, the kind that Canada only deploys when they are preparing to mount a coordinated economic defense. Tonight, senior Canadian officials confirmed that Carney's team has prepared retaliatory tariff packages targeting key American products, including agricultural goods from Republican-controlled states that were instrumental in Trump's electoral coalition. Carney moved before Trump could formalize his threats into executive action. They identified vulnerable supply chains in the American Midwest. They identified critical energy dependencies that would affect American consumers. They identified political pressure points that were likely preparing to support Trump's hardline trade stance. In other words, Carney targeted not just economic vulnerabilities, but political ones, the components that would have made Trump's tariff strategy operationally sustainable. This is what made Carney's warning so urgent. Trump's tariff threat wasn't just symbolic, it was actionable. It represented the kind of move that could destabilize integrated North American supply chains if left unchecked. And Carney, understanding that fully, responded with precision, not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. He didn't issue vague diplomatic protests. He didn't appeal to international trade tribunals without backup plans. He hit American agricultural exports that depend on Canadian markets. He hit energy exports that American refineries need to function efficiently. And here's where the story becomes even more consequential. Canadian intelligence analysts now believe that Trump's latest tariff threats were designed to test the resolve of Canada's incoming government after the transition from Trudeau. Trump wanted to see whether Carney would negotiate from weakness or capitulate to American pressure. But instead, the opposite happened. Carney didn't offer concessions. He launched a counteroffensive that was so swift, so comprehensive, that even Trump's trade advisors noticed. You don't get Donald Trump's attention easily, but today, Mark Carney did. Trade analysts speaking with Reuters under anonymity described Trump's strategy as economic brinkmanship, a way to extract concessions by threatening pain. But Carney proved today that Canada remains both economically resilient and politically unified. His countermeasures were not only rapid, they were calibrated so precisely that they targeted congressional districts that Trump cannot afford to lose in upcoming midterm considerations. That political element matters because it shows that Carney understands American domestic politics. It shows that Canada is not a passive recipient of American trade policy. They are an active architect of North American economic stability. As reports continued coming in throughout the afternoon, we learned more about the scale of Canada's prepared response. The Ministry of Finance drafted emergency legislation authorizing $30 billion in retaliatory tariffs, forcing American businesses to reassess their Canadian operations. Provincial governments coordinated procurement policies that had been diversified in the last 6 months, reducing dependence on American suppliers. Canadian trade negotiators operating in Washington reportedly activated backup trade partnerships with European and Asian markets used by Canada to reduce vulnerability to American protectionism. This wasn't just defensive posturing. This wasn't just diplomatic protest. This was economic deterrence. This was strategic independence. And strategic independence is the one thing Trump has struggled to comprehend since he first threatened Canada during his previous term. For every tariff threat he has made, Canada has countered with something that complicates his political calculations. Remember, Trump thought Canada would fold under pressure. He thought Carney would prioritize short-term trade stability over long-term sovereignty. He thought Canadian businesses would lobby their government to capitulate rather than face disruption. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Canada is unified in its resolve. Canadian businesses are backing Carney's hardline stance. Canadian public opinion is rallying behind economic independence from American coercion. What makes this moment so significant and so dangerous is that Trump's latest tariff threats happened at a time when he is under intense domestic pressure. Fiscal conservatives want reduced government intervention in trade. Manufacturing unions want protection from foreign competition. Agricultural exporters want access to Canadian markets. Energy companies want stable cross-border supply chains. Trump is balancing these demands while managing congressional opposition and preparing for electoral challenges. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. The Canadian government's statement, now circulated through diplomatic channels and international media, was designed to signal that Ottawa is not willing to accept economic subordination to Washington's unilateral demands. Officials said plainly that Trump's tariff threats were inconsistent with the principles of fair trade and mutual respect between sovereign nations. That is diplomatic language for, we will not be bullied and we will respond with equal force. You don't usually hear that tone from Canadian officials unless something fundamental is at stake. Meanwhile, Mark Carney addressed Canadian business leaders in a measured, resolute speech tonight. He said, Canada will not negotiate under the threat of economic coercion. He said, we have built an economy that is resilient, diversified, and capable of withstanding pressure. And he said, to our American friends, we say this, partnership requires respect, and respect cannot be demanded through threats. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a government that understands just how high the stakes have become. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Trump's latest tariff threats weren't isolated. Along with steel and aluminum tariffs, Trade Representative Catherine Tai also signaled potential renegotiation of USMCA provisions. Treasury officials floated currency manipulation accusations against Canada. Republican senators increased rhetoric targeting Canadian energy exports flowing to U.S. markets. All of this happened within the same 48-hour period. When Trump moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. Analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Trump is preparing a comprehensive renegotiation of North American trade architecture ahead of the 2026 midterm elections. Another is that Trump is attempting to distract from domestic economic challenges by creating an external adversary. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Trump is attempting to fundamentally reshape Canada-U.S. relations by establishing economic dominance. But today, Carney took that card off the table. He didn't issue empty threats. He didn't appeal to international sympathy. He didn't wait for Washington to act first. He prepared concrete countermeasures that would inflict real economic and political pain on the Trump administration. What we're watching now is a test of resolve. Trump wants to see whether Canada will prioritize short-term economic stability over sovereignty. Carney wants to show that Canada will defend its economic independence regardless of short-term costs. The White House wants to prevent Canada from establishing independent trade relationships that reduce American leverage, and Ottawa wants to prevent the United States from treating Canada as an economic subordinate rather than an equal partner. Tonight, we've heard from trade experts who are now monitoring market reactions and diplomatic responses. They say Canada's position has strengthened international support for rules-based trade. They say Trump's tariff threats have unified Canadian public opinion in ways not seen since the original NAFTA negotiations. And they say Trump's decision to escalate trade rhetoric is likely part of a broader electoral strategy intended to mobilize his political base around economic nationalism. But Carney is not backing down. In fact, Carney is doubling down. His response today, swift, strategic, and substantive, sent a message to Trump that economic coercion will be met with equal force. And it sent a message to international markets that Canada is prepared to defend its economic sovereignty. As the coming days unfold, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Trump hoped to achieve with these tariff threats. But what we do know is that Carney's response was timely. It prevented Trump from establishing a narrative of Canadian weakness. It signaled to international partners that Canada remains a reliable trading partner, and it demonstrated that the Carney government will not govern through fear of American economic pressure. What happens next will depend on what Trump does in the next 72 hours. If he backs down, this moment will be remembered as the point where economic coercion failed against a unified Canadian response. If he escalates, Carney has already shown he is ready with comprehensive countermeasures. They have shown they are ready to respond. And tonight, for the first time in weeks, the Trump administration appears to be recalculating. The White House press office is quiet. Too quiet. And when Trump is quiet after being challenged, it means he is evaluating his options. It means he is choosing his next move carefully. Because tonight, Trump learned something he should have remembered from his first term. Canada may be smaller, but it is not weaker. Canada may prefer partnership, but it will not accept subordination. And Mark Carney is not a leader who negotiates from fear. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. Canada has drawn a line. That line will hold. And Trump now knows that tariff threats alone will not move it. And we will be here watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.